in a quiet residential area on the outskirts of New York. Golden leaves shimmered, heralding the arrival of autumn. Eleanor Brown, now 68, vividly remembered the events of about 40 years ago. Those days that significantly altered her life, the conflict with her mother-in-law, discord with her sister, and parting from her beloved father. From the large living room window, Eleanor watched her granddaughter Jessica playing in the garden. At 8 years old, Jessica strongly resembled a younger Eleanor. Long brown hair, intelligent eyes, and above all, a gentle nature that always considered others. "Jessica, come here," Eleanor called to her granddaughter. Jessica stopped playing and ran to her grandmother. "What is it, Grandma?" As she gently wiped her granddaughter's sweaty forehead, Eleanor said, "Shall I tell you about when I was about your age?" Jessica sat next to her grandmother, eager with interest. "Yes, I want to hear it. What were you like when you were young?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, but this isn't just an old tale. It's our family history and a lesson in life." Eleanor took a deep breath and opened the doors to memories she had long sealed away. "When I was 30 years old, on the Upper East Side of New York City, amid the hustle and bustle of the city, with its towering buildings, the Brown family's luxurious house maintained a quiet presence. At 30, Eleanor Brown was beginning to climb the ladder of success as a lawyer. Her father, George Brown, was 65 and had just retired as a history professor from Columbia University. Eleanor had a younger sister, Samantha, who was 4 years younger than her. Samantha was sociable and charming but lacked a sense of responsibility. She worked at an advertising agency but was more devoted to parties and dating than her job. Their mother, Caroline, doted on Samantha and often neglected Eleanor. Caroline, a housewife who valued her status in high society, expected her daughters to have good marriages. One autumn evening, the four of them were gathered around the Brown family dining table. Outside the window, the autumn leaves in Central Park shone beautifully. Caroline, excited, said, "Eleanor, you'll come to the garden party next month, won't you? The Rockefellers will be there too." Eleanor put down her fork and sighed. "Sorry, Mom, I have a deadline for an important case." Caroline frowned. "Well, that's too bad. Samantha will be there. She might meet some young men from the Rockefeller family." Eleanor felt a pang in her heart. Not receiving her mother's love was an old wound. "Work is important too, Mom." "Yes, but, Eleanor," Caroline admonished her, "you're already 30. It looks bad to still be single at your age." Samantha chuckled. "That's right, big sister. You won't attract anyone if you're all about work." Eleanor quietly cleared the plates. Only her father, George, looked at her with understanding. The next day, Eleanor and her father George went for a walk. The trees in Central Park were beginning to change color, signaling the arrival of autumn. "Dad, Eleanor searched for the right words. "I don't know if I can keep living together as a family." George gently embraced his daughter's shoulders. "Eleanor, you are a wonderful daughter. I am proud of you. Your mother and Samantha, well, they have their own values, but you should follow your own path." Eleanor teared up. "Thank you, Dad, but it's hard sometimes. Mom and Samantha don't understand me at all." George smiled gently. "Life is long, Eleanor. It might be tough now, but someday you'll understand each other. Until then, keep walking the path you believe in." Encouraged by her father's words, Eleanor was determined. "Understood, Dad. I'll do my best." From that day on, Eleanor devoted herself even more to her work. She decided to pursue her own dreams, not the expectations of her family. However, the rift with her family deepened day by day. Caroline grew increasingly upset about Eleanor's absence from social events, and Samantha continued to criticize her sister's way of living. Despite the family strife, Eleanor steadily built her career as a lawyer. She handled many cases defending the rights of the socially disadvantaged, gradually gaining the trust of her colleagues and clients. One day, Eleanor took on the defense of a whistleblower who accused a major corporation of wrongdoing. This case had the potential to significantly impact her career. Eleanor worked day and night, gathering evidence and devising strategies. Only her father, George, supported her silently through this. "Eleanor, don't overdo it," George said, looking at his daughter's tired face. Eleanor smiled. "It's okay, Dad. This is important work for me." On the other hand, Caroline and Samantha did not try to understand Eleanor's commitment to her work. Working again, Samantha said, with a sigh of disbelief, "Sis, are you enjoying your life?" Caroline agreed. "That's right, Eleanor. You won't meet anyone nice if you're always working." Eleanor sighed quietly. She had a secret she couldn't tell her family. In fact, she was engaged to a man named Michael Clark, a former college classmate who was then a pediatrician. However, Eleanor could not find the right moment to tell her family, fearing their reaction. She was particularly worried that Caroline might criticize Michael's family background or financial status. Meanwhile, Eleanor's whistleblower case made significant progress. Her efforts paid off and the corporate malfeasance was brought to light. This achievement became a major topic in the legal community, and Eleanor's reputation soared. However, she couldn't share this joy at home. Caroline and Samantha did not seem genuinely happy about Eleanor's success. Instead, they were rather cold. "Well, isn't that something?" Caroline said sarcastically. "But are you sure it's okay to become so famous? Will you be able to find a marriage partner?" While feeling sad, Eleanor remembered the encouraging words from her father, "Keep walking the path you believe in." Yes, this was the path she had chosen. In the spring of 2005, a tragedy struck the Brown family. George fell down the stairs at home and severely injured his back. That day, Eleanor was in the middle of an important trial. Her cell phone was on silent mode, and she only noticed the multiple calls from her mother after the court session ended. "Mom, what's wrong?" Eleanor called back, feeling anxious. Caroline's voice was trembling. "Eleanor, I finally got through. It's terrible. Dad fell down the stairs. We're at the hospital now." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "I understand. I'm coming right away." She rushed to the hospital. When she arrived at the hospital room, Caroline and Samantha were already there. George was conscious but grimacing in pain. The doctor's explanation was grim. "Mrs. Brown, his injury is serious. He has a complex fracture in his hip, and surgery is needed. It will take time for rehabilitation afterward." Caroline was distraught. "Oh, this is terrible. What are we going to do now?" Eleanor responded calmly. "Mom, I'll adjust my work. I'll take care of Dad." Samantha looked puzzled. "But sis, don't you have important work to do?" Eleanor stared at her sister. "Family is more important, Samantha." The surgery was successful, but George's recovery was slow. Eleanor managed her father's care in between work commitments. She worked at the office during the day and sometimes stayed overnight at the hospital. One day, when George woke up in the hospital room, Eleanor was by his side. "Eleanor," George called out in a weak voice. "Dad, are you okay? Do you need anything?" Eleanor asked gently. George smiled. "No, I don't need anything. I'm just glad you're here." Eleanor gripped her father's hand. "Of course, Dad. I'm here for you." George stared into his daughter's face. "Eleanor, you've really become strong, but I want you to take care of yourself too." Eleanor held back tears as she replied, "I know, Dad. I'll stay with you until you're better." Meanwhile, Caroline and Samantha seemed to avoid taking care of George. Even when they visited the hospital, they did not stay long and often left quickly. One day, Eleanor asked her mother and sister, "Hey, Samantha, I have an important business trip this weekend. Can you take care of Dad?" Samantha frowned. "Sorry, Eleanor. I have plans to go to the Hamptons with friends." Caroline also shook her head. "It's difficult for me too. I have a ladies' meeting." Eleanor was disappointed but not surprised. "I see," she said quietly. "Then, I guess I'll have to cancel the business trip." That night, Eleanor cried in her father's hospital room. George comforted his daughter with a weak voice. "Eleanor, you're doing enough. Don't blame yourself." Eleanor gripped her father's hand. "Dad, I'll do my best. I'll make sure you get better." As days passed, Eleanor struggled to balance her work and caring for her father. Her colleagues understood her situation and supported her as much as they could. However, time management was always a challenge for her as she handled major cases. One day, Eleanor unexpectedly met Michael in the hospital corridor. Michael called out, surprised. Eleanor smiled, though she looked tired. "Michael, what are you doing here?" Michael smiled gently. I'm doing rounds in pediatrics. Are you here to take care of your dad? Eleanor nodded. Yes, that's right. Michael looked at her worriedly. Are you okay? Are you not overdoing it? Eleanor sighed deeply. Honestly, it's tough. Work, caregiving, family issues, it's all piling up. Michael gently placed his hand on her shoulder. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Let's get through this together. Eleanor felt immensely grateful. Thank you, Michael. It's really comforting to have you here. Suddenly, hurried footsteps came from the nurse's station. Ms. Brown, a nurse shouted. Your father's condition has changed suddenly. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. She gave Michael a quick, apologetic look and immediately ran to her father's room. As she entered the room, doctors were bustling about. George was breathing painfully, and his complexion was poor. Dad, Eleanor exclaimed. One of the doctors turned to her. Ms. Brown, your father has developed acute pneumonia. We need to move him to the ICU immediately. Eleanor, shocked yet trying to remain composed, asked, What should I do? The doctor explained briefly. For now, please leave it to us. Can you contact your family members? Eleanor nodded and shakily took out her mobile phone. She was reluctant to contact Caroline and Samantha, but this was not the time for hesitation. Mom, Eleanor said on the phone. Dad's condition has suddenly worsened. Come to the hospital right away. Caroline's voice was full of surprise and anxiety. Oh my, that's terrible. I'll come right away. She contacted Samantha similarly. Samantha's voice had a rare serious tone. Hours later, the whole family gathered at the hospital. In front of the ICU, they listened to the doctor's explanation. Ms. Brown, the doctor chose his words carefully. Your father's condition is stable now, but it is still critical. The next few days will be crucial. Caroline broke down crying, and Samantha was also in tears. Eleanor stood quietly but was internally assaulted by a storm of emotions. That night, Eleanor decided to stay at the hospital. Caroline and Samantha went home tired, but Eleanor wanted to be near her father. Late at night, in the silence in front of the ICU, Eleanor sat alone. Suddenly, she felt someone sit next to her. When she turned, it was Michael. Michael, Eleanor said in a surprised voice. Michael smiled gently. I thought you might be here alone. Eleanor felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you, really. Thank you. Michael quietly took Eleanor's hand. Let's get through this together. I'm here for you. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to express her emotions freely. She buried her face in Michael's shoulder and began to cry quietly. Michael hugged her gently and stayed by her side without saying a word. That night, Eleanor confronted her own vulnerabilities, which she had long kept sealed away. For the first time, she truly accepted that she didn't need to carry everything on her own. The next morning, Eleanor received news that her father's condition had slightly improved. She sighed with relief as she looked out the window. The sunrise was beginning, signaling the start of a new day. Eleanor quietly vowed, Dad, please get better. Let's all be happy together as a family again. At that moment, she felt the importance of family bonds more strongly than ever before. George's condition fluctuated. Though he was out of immediate danger, full recovery seemed far off. Eleanor visited the hospital daily and accompanied her father during his rehabilitation. One day, the doctor called Eleanor in. His expression was grave, and Eleanor felt anxious. Ms. Brown, we have the results of your father's tests. The doctor chose his words carefully. I'm sorry, but we found late-stage pancreatic cancer. Eleanor was speechless. But my father just had a fracture. The doctor continued quietly. It was discovered during tests for the fracture. It's quite advanced. Unfortunately, there's little hope for effective treatment. Eleanor felt a sense of despair. How much time does he have? She asked with a trembling voice. The doctor sighed deeply. It's hard to say exactly, but probably between 6 months to a year. Eleanor, holding back tears, resolved to cherish the time left with her father. She decided to quit her job and devote herself to caring for her father. Her partner, Michael, understood her decision. Eleanor, I understand how you feel, Michael said kindly. Take the time you need. Your place is always open here. Eleanor was filled with gratitude. Thank you, Michael. That really helps. However, Caroline and Samantha's reactions were cold. Eleanor, are you crazy? Samantha said in a dismayed tone. To throw away your career like that. Caroline agreed. That's right, Eleanor. What are you planning to do after Dad passes? How will you live? Eleanor responded, suppressing her sadness and anger. Mom, Dad's well-being is what's important right now. Don't worry about me. Though she had quit her job, Eleanor had Michael. She could afford to pause her career because of Michael's support. Yet, she still hadn't found the right moment to discuss this with her family. One day, while Eleanor was caring for George in the hospital room, he quietly opened his eyes. Eleanor, George called out in a weak voice. Dad, is something wrong? Eleanor asked gently. George smiled faintly. No, there's something I want to tell you. Eleanor leaned in. What is it, Dad? About your fiancé. I know about him, George said slowly. Eleanor stared at her father in surprise. What? How? George gently held his daughter's hand. Eleanor, I like to think I know you well. Seeing you happy, I suspected there must be something. Eleanor, holding back tears, replied, I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't tell you. George smiled. There's no need to apologize. You had your reasons, didn't you? Was his name Michael? Can you tell me about him? Mixed with surprise and relief, Eleanor began to talk to her father about Michael. Their meeting, how they understand each other, and their dreams for the future. The more she spoke, the brighter Eleanor's expression became. George listened intently to his daughter's story. I'm happy to see you so happy, he said. But why didn't you tell Mom and Samantha? After a brief silence, Eleanor quietly answered, I was afraid of how they would react. I thought they might make an issue of Michael's family background or wealth. George sighed deeply. I see. Certainly those two can be a bit biased in their thinking. But Eleanor, your happiness is what's most important. They'll come to understand that eventually. Encouraged by her father's words. Thank you, Dad. But I still need a little more time. George nodded. Understood. I trust your judgment. At that moment, George seemed to remember something. That's right, Eleanor. There's something I need to tell you. What is it, Dad? Eleanor leaned in. I've paid for your wedding and the down payment for your new apartment. George said that with a hint of pride. Eleanor was shocked. But, Dad? Seeing his daughter's reaction, George smiled. Surprised? Actually, I've been saving a little ever since you became a lawyer, for your future. Eleanor was at a loss for words. She felt a warmth in her chest from her father's deep affection. George continued, I want you to be happy. With Michael, you can be happy. I can see that. Eleanor, holding back tears, gripped her father's hand. Dad, thank you so much. But all that money. George said kindly, Don't worry about it. It's a gift from me for the start of your new life. Eleanor was so moved that she was speechless. She gently hugged her father. Dad, thank you so much. I will be happy. I promise. George smiled faintly. I'm glad to hear that. But Eleanor, there's one more thing I'd like to ask. Anything, Dad. Eleanor replied earnestly. George hesitated for a moment before speaking quietly. It's about your mother and Samantha. Could you forgive them? Eleanor stared at her father in surprise. But, Dad, George continued, they have their own circumstances, especially your mother. He chose his words carefully as he spoke. Actually, she had a tough time when she was young. Eleanor listened quietly. George's eyes narrowed as he recalled the past. Your mother's family was very strict. George began to explain. She was never allowed to pursue her own dreams and was always forced to meet the expectations of those around her. And, unknowingly, she directed that suffering towards you and your sister. For the first time, Eleanor learned about her mother's past and was struck by complex emotions. I never knew that. George continued. Samantha has also been strongly influenced by your mother, They don't understand the pain they've endured themselves. Eleanor thought deeply. Learning about her family's complex circumstances for the first time gave her a new perspective. George gently held his daughter's hand. I'm not asking you to understand them, but if there's a chance for reconciliation, I hope you'll cherish it. Family is irreplaceable, after all. Eleanor nodded slowly. I understand, Dad. I can't promise anything, but I'll try. George looked relieved. That's enough for me, Eleanor. I believe in you. From that day on, Eleanor cherished her time with her father even more. She brought Michael to the hospital room, and the three of them discussed their future plans together. George's eyes sparkled as he talked about the grandchildren he hoped to meet one day, wishing for Eleanor and Michael to build a happy home together. However, George's condition worsened day by day. Eleanor stayed by her father's side, cherishing their last moments together. On a quiet night, as Eleanor held her father's hand in the hospital room, George quietly opened his eyes. Eleanor. His voice was hoarse. I'm proud of you. Those were his last words. George Brown passed away quietly, watched over by his loving daughter. Eleanor wept bitterly. The grief of losing her father, her main support and sole understanding figure, was too profound to express in words. Michael rushed over and silently embraced Eleanor. In his warmth, Eleanor resolved to take a new step in life, carrying the memories of her father with her. George's funeral was a dignified and quiet affair, reflecting his character. Many of his students and colleagues attended, reminiscing about George's passion for academia and his personality. Eleanor spoke as the chief mourner. My father loved his academics and his family. His teachings will continue to live on in our hearts. Caroline and Samantha seemed restless during the funeral. They checked their phones repeatedly and engaged in chatter with the attendees. Eleanor was pained by their behavior but remembered her father's words and suppressed her anger. After the funeral, when only the family remained, Caroline and Samantha made a shocking announcement to Eleanor. Eleanor, about Dad's inheritance. Caroline stared at Eleanor with cold eyes. Samantha and I will inherit everything. Eleanor was stunned. What did you say? Samantha added smugly. There's a will, too. Look. She pulled out a document and thrust it in front of Eleanor. Eleanor took the will with trembling hands. It clearly stated that all the inheritance was to be left to Caroline and Samantha. However, Eleanor noticed that the signature was clearly different from her father's usual handwriting. This is. Eleanor began to speak carefully. This isn't Dad's handwriting. Caroline's complexion changed. What are you talking about? Of course, it's Dad's signature. Samantha started making excuses in a flurry. Right after Dad was hospitalized, Mom and I went to his room and had him write it. He agreed right away not to leave anything to you, Eleanor. While holding back her anger, Eleanor then said, Dad would never do such a thing. That's impossible. Caroline raised her voice. Shut up, you can't leech off us. Samantha joined in. That's right. You've been acting all high and mighty, taking care of Dad, but in the end, he liked us better than his boring, serious daughter. Eleanor was deeply hurt. However, she tried to remain calm. She remembered her last conversation with her father and took a deep breath. Mom, Samantha. Eleanor said quietly, yet firmly. If this is truly Dad's will, I will respect it, but I will have a lawyer verify if this is really his will. Caroline's face contorted. There's no need for that. It's already decided. Samantha scoffed. Yeah, it's too late for you to start scrambling for scraps now. Eleanor stood up quietly. I understand. I can no longer live with you all. I'm leaving. Caroline said triumphantly. That's right. Leave. And don't ever show your face again. Eleanor silently began to pack her things. The last shred of affection she had for her family disappeared. But she also remembered her father's words. If there's a chance for reconciliation, cherish it. Before leaving the room, Eleanor turned and said, This is how you treat Dad's memory. I can never forgive this. But she hesitated slightly, then continued. I hope one day we can understand each other. Caroline and Samantha were momentarily taken aback. A fleeting look of regret seemed to cross their eyes. However, their expressions quickly turned cold again. Leave and never come back," Caroline said at last. Eleanor silently opened the door and left her childhood home behind. The cold night wind struck her cheeks. She took a deep breath and stepped forward into her new life. A week had passed since Eleanor left her family home. She was staying at her fiancé Michael's apartment. Michael supported her gently and comforted her. "Eleanor, it's okay. I'm here for you," Michael said as he held her shoulder. Eleanor was filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Michael. I'm really glad you're here." Just then, Eleanor's cell phone rang. Looking at the screen, it was a call from her mother, Caroline. Eleanor hesitated but decided to answer the call. "Hello." From the other end, Caroline's shouting voice could be heard. "Eleanor, where did you put the money from your father's account?" Eleanor responded calmly. "What are you talking about, Mom? Don't play dumb. When I checked the account, almost all the money was gone." Caroline's voice was frantic. Eleanor sighed. "Mom, have you ever checked the balance before? Dad used it for my wedding and new home expenses." Over the phone, Caroline gasped. Eleanor continued. "Dad knew about my fiancés, and he spent the money for our new life together. That's..." Caroline's voice trembled. "Then, the inheritance we were supposed to receive is almost nothing," Eleanor said quietly. "Besides the family home, that is." Caroline was speechless. After a moment of silence, Samantha's voice could be heard. "Sis, you're joking, right?" Samantha's voice was also shaky. "What are we supposed to do now?" Eleanor answered calmly. "That's up to you. It has nothing to do with me." "But, Eleanor..." Samantha sounded like she was about to cry. "I quit my job, thinking we could live off the inheritance." Eleanor then said sternly, "You should take responsibility for your own actions." Caroline took the phone again. "Eleanor, please help. We've already booked a trip and can't cancel it." Eleanor chuckled. "You've already booked a trip just after the funeral. You weren't mourning Dad at all, were you?" Caroline started to cry. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. We were wrong. Please help us." Eleanor took a deep breath. "Mom, Samantha, it's too late for apologies now, but let me say this. Dad was thinking of you until the end, and yet you..." Over the phone, the sound of Caroline and Samantha sobbing could be heard. Eleanor continued, "From now on, you'll have to live on your own. I no longer have a duty to help you." With that, Eleanor hung up the phone. Michael silently embraced her. "Are you okay?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm fine. I feel like everything is finally settled." Several months later, Eleanor and Michael started their new life in the new home. George had prepared for them. The wedding was small but heartfelt. On the day of the ceremony, Eleanor placed a photo of her father on the altar. "Thank you, Dad. Your love supports me now." Meanwhile, Caroline and Samantha's lives changed drastically. Their lavish lifestyle was over, and they began to struggle with debt repayments. Samantha tried to return to her former company but was not accepted back, so she moved from one part-time job to another. Caroline also found herself searching for a job for the first time. Occasionally, Eleanor heard about their situations through acquaintances. Sometimes, a slight feeling of sympathy would arise in her heart, but no more than that. 5 years later, Eleanor was walking in the park with her husband, Michael. "Hey, Michael," Eleanor said while holding her husband's hand. "We are happy, aren't we?" Michael smiled gently. "Yes, really happy." Eleanor looked up at the sky. "I feel like Dad is watching over us." Michael nodded. "I'm sure he is. George always wanted nothing more than your happiness." At that moment, Eleanor's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello. Is this Eleanor?" A hesitant voice came through. "I'm Samantha's daughter." Eleanor was surprised. She didn't know her sister had a child. "My mom is struggling." The girl's voice trembled. "It's about money. But I can't do anything about it." Eleanor was momentarily at a loss for words. However, she quickly made up her mind. "I understand," Eleanor said quietly. "I'll see if there's anything I can do." After hanging up, Michael asked her, "Are you okay? Who was that?" Eleanor took a deep breath. It was Samantha's daughter. It seems that she and Mom are really in trouble. Michael then asked kindly, "What do you want to do?" Eleanor thought for a moment before answering. "I can't completely forgive them, but I can't abandon them either. Dad would surely say that." Michael nodded. "I support whatever decision you make." Eleanor looked up at the sky. Through the clouds, warm sunlight streamed down. "Dad?" Eleanor murmured in her heart. "I haven't forgotten your teachings. Family bonds, even when hurt, are never completely severed." From that day on, Eleanor decided to gradually mend her relationship with her mother and Samantha. It would be a long journey. However, the love and tolerance passed down from her father, George, would guide her. In 2024, Eleanor was 68 years old. She had become a successful lawyer, helping many people. Now, beside her was her 8-year-old granddaughter, Jessica. "Grandma, what happened after that?" Jessica looked at Eleanor with curious eyes. Eleanor smiled gently. "Well, it took time, but we gradually mended our relationship. Grandma Samantha and Great-Grandma Caroline realized their mistakes and truly repented. Now we all get together as a family sometimes." Eleanor continued, "Of course, it's not as close as it used to be, but we have managed to regain a sense of caring for each other." Jessica was moved, and she then said, "That's amazing, Grandma. I think forgiving is hard." Eleanor gently stroked her granddaughter's head. "Yes, Jessica, forgiving is really hard, but forgiving also makes your own heart lighter, and it creates a chance to build new relationships." Jessica listened intently. Eleanor continued, "But the most important thing is not to compromise your own values. Forgiving is different from losing yourself. That's what your great-great-grandfather, my dad, taught me." Eleanor looked out the window. In the garden, flowers of various colors were blooming. They were flowers she had planted with her mother and Samantha. Families can hurt each other sometimes, but they are still family. Eleanor said quietly, "What's important is to try to understand each other and not to forget about love." Jessica deeply engraved her grandmother's words in her heart. Eleanor stood up and took an album from the shelf. "Hey, Jessica, do you want to look at this album? It contains our family's history." Jessica sat next to her grandmother with curiosity. Eleanor slowly began to turn the pages. There were photos filled with joy, sadness, conflict, and reconciliation, a variety of emotions captured in family photographs. "Look, this is your great-grandfather." Eleanor pointed to a photo of George smiling. "His teachings still support our family today." Jessica stared intently at the photo. "Great-grandpa looks kind." Eleanor nodded. "Yes, he was a truly kind person, and he taught us the importance of family bonds." As she flipped through the album, Eleanor continued to tell her granddaughter about their family history. She shared everything, both the joys and the sorrows, without hiding anything. It was an important lesson she wanted to pass on to the next generation. At dusk, Eleanor and Jessica went out to the garden. The setting sun beautifully colored the sky. "Hey, Jessica," Eleanor said gently, "life has many challenges, but there's nothing we can't overcome. Believe in your family, believe in yourself, and cherish the people you love. That's the path to happiness." Jessica gripped her grandmother's hand. "I understand, Grandma. I will cherish my family too, and I want to be strong and kind like you." Eleanor hugged her granddaughter. Tears of joy and gratitude sparkled in her eyes. The wind gently enveloped them both. Eleanor felt as if she could sense her father George's warm gaze. "Thank you, Dad," Eleanor murmured in her heart. "Your last gift has brought happiness to our family." As the sun set and a new night began, Eleanor vowed to continue cherishing the bonds of family and to walk into the new days ahead.